We moved into our current home when I was 3 years old. It is a large, older colonial structure with long hallways and an aggressive amount of dead space. By the time I turned 9, the baseline atmosphere of the house had already begun to shift for me. We were standard, practical churchgoers. To my parents, the physical world was logical, houses settled, floorboards creaked. To them, I was just the spiritual daughter, the dramatic child who read too many ghost stories and needed a nightlight. I experienced the standard anomalies, the oppressive sensation of being observed while standing alone in an empty room, the distinct, muffled thud of heavy footsteps traversing the ceiling of my bedroom when everyone else was asleep on the ground floor. My parents dismissed it as the house shifting on its foundation. My siblings mocked me. Eventually, I stopped reporting it. You learn to internalize the dread when nobody believes the threat is real. But some events can't be internalized. My trauma is built on 2 specific nights. The first incident occurred when I was 10. It was midwinter. All 5 of us, my parents, my brother, my sister, and I, were gathered in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor, watching a movie. Around 9 o'clock, I got thirsty. My mother sent me down to the kitchen to grab a water bottle. I have always hated the dark. I hate the loss of depth perception. Our staircase is steep, and the light switches are positioned awkwardly. Usually when I went downstairs, I would flip the hallway switch from the top landing, illuminating the lower floor before I descended. For some reason, I forgot to hit the switch that night. I hurried down the dark steps, navigated the unlit kitchen by memory, grabbed a plastic bottle from the refrigerator, and headed back toward the stairs. By the time my foot hit the first upward tread, the anxiety was already blooming in my chest. I ran up the steps, desperate to return to the safety of the master bedroom. I reached the 2nd floor landing. The hallway was completely starved of light. The only light was the faint, blue flicker of the television, leaking under the gap of my parents' closed bedroom door. I grabbed the brass doorknob, I twisted it and pushed forward. The mechanism engaged, but the door refused to yield. It was not locked. A locked knob refuses to turn. This knob turned freely, but the heavy wooden panel felt as though it was cemented into the doorframe. Panic flared. I gripped the smooth metal with both hands, twisting and rattling the hardware violently. I shoved my shoulder against the wood. It felt like I was pushing against a solid brick wall. I assumed my older brother was on the other side, leaning his back against the panels, playing a cruel prank to exploit my fear of the dark hallway. "Stop it," I hissed, my voice trembling. "Let me in." No one answered from inside the room. I could still hear the muffled dialogue of the movie playing. I rattled the knob again, my breathing accelerating into shallow gasps. I was shaking. I stepped back to throw my entire body weight against the barrier. As I shifted my footing, the silence in the hallway broke. Directly into my left ear, so close I could feel the air shift against my skin, something laughed. It was not my brother, it was not my sister. It was a low, resonant, wet sound, a vile, rattling exhalation like a heavy smoker choking on fluid. I froze, paralyzed on the landing, the plastic water bottle slipping from my fingers and hitting the carpet. The ambient temperature in the hallway plunged, raising the hair on my arms. I squeezed my eyes shut, planted my hands flat against the wooden door, and shoved forward with a blind, desperate surge of adrenaline. The door swung inward instantly. There was zero resistance. It was as if the barrier had simply ceased to exist. I stumbled into the bright, warm bedroom, gasping for air. My parents and my siblings were sitting on the bed, staring at the television screen. None of them were anywhere near the door. "Who blocked it?" I cried, my voice cracking. "Who held the door?" My mother gave me a confused, mildly irritated look. "Nobody held the door, honey. We were wondering what was taking you so long." I didn't drink the water. I crawled into the corner of the room and tucked my knees to my chest. That was the night I realized the house was not just shifting, it was participating. Years passed, the ambient dread became my baseline reality. I was 13 when the second, more profound anomaly shattered the fragile peace I had built. I was officially diagnosed with a hyperactive neurotype earlier that year, meaning my internal monologue is loud. My brain is a crowded room, constantly generating overlapping streams of thoughts, phantom noises, and mental clutter. I had learned to differentiate between external audio and internal cognitive noise. If I focused intensely on a specific song lyric in my head, the mental noise would fade. If the sound persisted, the audio was originating from the physical room. It was a random evening. My parents were upstairs. I was alone on the main level. The layout of our ground floor is essentially an open-concept rectangle, divided into 3 distinct zones: the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen. The spaces bleed into one another, separated only by wide archways. I was standing in the living room, changing out of my school uniform. The television was off. I had turned on the reading lamp near the sofa, which cast a pool of yellow light over the living area, softly illuminating the edge of the dining room. The kitchen, positioned at the far end of the rectangle, was completely unlit. The space was an abyss of deep shadow. As I pulled a sweater over my head, a strange low sound resonated through the open archways. A heavy, labored wheeze, distinctly congested respiration. I stopped moving. I stood barefoot on the carpet. My immediate reflex was to blame my own neurochemistry. It was an auditory hallucination, a misfire in my sensory processing. I closed my eyes. I pictured a metronome. I recited the lyrics to a popular radio song, forcing my internal monologue to override the anomaly. The wheezing cut cleanly through my mental exercise. I raised both hands and clamped my palms tightly over my ears, creating an acoustic seal. The silence was immediate. The breathing stopped. I lowered my hands. The heavy, wet respiration flooded back into my eardrums. The sound was not internal. It was projecting through physical space, and it was originating from the pitch-black void of the kitchen. A cold, heavy stone settled in the pit of my stomach. I crept forward, moving slowly from the illuminated living room into the dim periphery of the dining room. I used the dining table as a barrier, peering through the second archway toward the kitchen tiles. My eyes strained to adjust to the near-total darkness. Standing on the kitchen floor, stationed between the dark refrigerator and the center island, was a silhouette. It was the outline of an exceptionally tall, broad-shouldered man. He possessed no discernible features. He was an absolute void against the ambient darkness of the room. He was not walking. He was shifting his weight aggressively from his left foot to his right foot, rocking, swaying side to side with a tense, coiled kinetic energy. He was preparing to move. He was pacing himself, staring out from the dark, directly at the spot where I was standing. I did not scream. I did not attempt to find the kitchen light switch. I backed out of the dining room, turned, and sprinted for the main staircase. I vaulted up the steps 3 at a time, threw open my bedroom door, slammed it shut, and drove the lock home. I sat with my back against the wall until the sun crested the horizon. The next morning, my parents dismissed the incident entirely. They attributed the breathing to the AC unit struggling to push air through a clogged filter. They attributed the silhouette to shadows cast by the exterior streetlights filtering through the blinds. I am 18 now. I endure the ambient anxiety, the missing objects, and the phantom footsteps tracking across the upper floors. My family insists my spiritual leanings have warped my perception of reality, but I know the strict physical rules of the universe. AC units do not wear broad-shouldered coats. Floorboards do not hold wooden doors shut with impossible strength. I have accepted the fact that when I finally save enough money to pack my boxes and leave this house, I will be leaving behind something that never technically paid rent but always claimed ownership. I build and repair broadcast towers. It is a highly specialized trade. To do this job, you must have an absolute, unwavering respect for the physical laws of the universe. Gravity does not negotiate. Tensile strength has strict mathematical limits. When you are strapped to a galvanized steel lattice 300 feet above the tree line, You trust your climbing harness, your carabiners, and the weather forecast. You do not leave room for imagination. My name is Vance. I am 45 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life working in the sky. 3 autumns ago, I caught a maintenance ticket for a rural cellular relay station deep in the Monongahela National Forest. It was a standard, 3-sided guide mast, towering about 400 feet over a densely wooded valley. My objective was basic: the primary aviation warning beacon at the very top. The red flashing light that keeps crop dusters from clipping the structure had burned out. I arrived at the access road around 4 in the afternoon. The temperature was dropping. A thick, slate-gray fog was rolling down the ridges, settling into the valley basin. By the time I strapped on my climbing gear and locked my safety ascender to the steel pegboard, the base of the structure was already cloaked in mist. Climbing a tower is an exercise in rhythm. You clip, you step, you pull. You settle into a zone where the rest of the world fades away. By the time I reached the 300-foot mark, the ground was entirely gone. I was suspended in a void of damp, white fog. The wind up there is usually a constant roar, but on this specific afternoon, the air was dead calm. The silence was absolute. Just the metallic clinking of my brass tool clips against my utility belt. I reached the apex platform. I attached my secondary lanyard to a solid cross brace, ensuring I had 2 points of contact, and leaned back into my harness to free up my hands. I popped the weather seal off the aviation light housing. I was reaching into my pouch for the replacement halogen bulb when I heard the first sound. I stopped moving my hands. It was the distinct, sharp sound of hard-soled dress shoes walking across a polished marble floor. I turned my head. There was no marble floor. There was only the rusted steel grating beneath my boots and 300 feet of empty air below that. I figured my 2-way radio was picking up a stray FM signal. Radio frequency interference is common around active arrays. The electromagnetic fields can do strange things to unshielded speakers. I reached down to my hip and twisted the volume knob on my radio all the way to 0. The walking sound did not fade, it grew louder. It was approaching me from the left, out over the open drop. Then a voice spoke. It was a woman's voice, incredibly clear, originating precisely 2 inches from my left ear. "Excuse me. Do you know which terminal serves the inbound flight from Chicago?" My breath hitched. The voice lacked static. It lacked the tinny, compressed audio signature of a radio transmission. It carried the rich, acoustic depth of a person standing right beside me in an enclosed room. I could hear the subtle inhalation of air before she formed the consonants. I whipped my head around. The glow of my helmet light broke through the haze. There was nothing, just swirling white mist and cold steel. Before I could rationalize the auditory hallucination, the environment around me shifted. The temperature plummeted. The combined scent of pine needles and grease thinned, then disappeared. Instead, I inhaled the distinct, sanitized scent of floor wax and stale coffee. A cacophony of overlapping noises erupted in the empty air surrounding the tower. Suitcases rolling over tile, a distant PA announcer reading out flight delays, the low murmur of 100 distinct conversations. I was hovering 300 feet above a remote Appalachian forest, but my ears were telling my brain I was standing in the middle of a crowded airport concourse. I gripped the structural steel pipe in front of me. I gripped the metal until my knuckles throbbed, grounding myself in reality. I closed my eyes, telling myself it was a localized stroke, a lack of oxygen, vertigo playing tricks on my sensory processing. But then, the physical rules of the world broke. I felt a sharp tug on the primary nylon rope supporting my waist. Usually when you lean back in a climbing harness, gravity pulls the rope taut downward, but the tension didn't pull down. The rope went slack for a fraction of a second and then pulled upward. My boots lost contact with the steel grating. I was lifted roughly 6 inches into the air. Something invisible, situated directly above me in the fog, was reeling my tether in. I opened my eyes. I looked up. Through the dense white mist, I saw the faint, fluorescent flicker of long, rectangular ceiling lights, suspended in the sky, moving past me. Terminal 4 is just down the escalator, a man's voice answered from my right side. The upward pull on my harness intensified, the nylon webbing cut into my ribs. The structure of the tower groaned, not from wind, but from an impossible physics equation applying upward torque to an anchored point. I did not pause to investigate, I did not look up again. I grabbed my titanium descent track. I bypassed standard safety protocols, threaded the line with a fast friction loop, unclipped my primary ascender, and dropped. I slid down the steel pegs, burning the synthetic fibers of my gloves. The metal rushed past my visor. I descended 300 feet in under 2 minutes, my boots slamming into the muddy earth at the base of the mast. I severed my climbing rope with a utility knife, leaving the upper half tangled in the structure. I threw my gear into the bed of my truck, started the engine, and drove the access road back to the state highway. I never filed an incident report. If you tell a corporate safety manager that gravity reversed itself and an airport terminal materialized in the clouds, they pull your climbing certification and send you for a psychological evaluation. I still climb, I still trust the tensile strength of my rigging, but I actively decline any maintenance tickets for Site 409. We think the sky is empty, only wind and weather, but at certain heights the world thins, and if you climb too far into the fog, you might step somewhere you cannot fall back down from. I have inhabited the exact same floor plan for 26 years. My grandparents purchased the property in the late 70s. It is a sprawling, draft-heavy craftsman built in upstate New York. When you reside in a single structure for that long, you develop a deeply ingrained acoustic map of the space. You know which wooden tread sags under the weight of a footstep. You know the metallic rattle of the radiator in the winter. You memorize the baseline rhythm of the house. When a new variable is introduced into that environment, the disruption is unmistakable. Our underground cellar has a distinctive design. At the bottom of the wooden basement steps, the staircase terminates at a small, poured concrete landing. Branching off the left and right sides of that landing are two heavy, solid oak doors. The left door leads to an obsolete coal chute. The right door opens into a sprawling, unfinished storage wing packed with oxidized paint cans, broken furniture, and decaying cardboard boxes of seasonal decorations. The atmosphere down there is stagnant. It smells perpetually of damp earth and stale dust. We only descend those steps to cycle the laundry. Those thick oak doors remain firmly shut. 2 months ago, I adopted a rescue feline. He's a wiry, energetic tortoiseshell mix named Barnaby. Barnaby possesses a massive prey drive. His favorite method of play involves utilizing gravity. He bats small, dense rubber toys down the cellar stairs, bounds after them, and prances proudly back up to the kitchen tile with the toy clamped in his jaw. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my dining table, tracing patterns onto drafting paper. Barnaby was engaged in his usual routine with a blue rubber sphere. I listened to the familiar sequence of noises. The hollow bounce of the rubber hitting the wooden stairs, the rapid scratching of his claws as he darted downward, the brief pause at the concrete landing, the quick scramble back up to my level. He executed this loop 5 consecutive times. On the 6th throw, the acoustics of the game shifted. The rubber sphere bounced down the stairs, followed by the clatter of his paws. Then the routine broke. Barnaby did not retrieve the item. Instead, a low, sustained vocalization echoed up the stairwell. It was not a standard domestic meow. It was a guttural, rattling yowl, the specific sound a territorial animal makes when cornered by a predator. I heard a frantic, uncoordinated scrambling against the wood. Barnaby crested the top of the stairs in a blind panic. His posture was entirely warped. His spine was arched into a harsh curve. The fur along his ridge and tail stood rigidly on end, transforming him into a bristling mass of static electricity. He did not look at me. He darted directly under the floral skirting of the living room sofa and refused to emerge. The blue rubber toy remained at the bottom of the steps. I hesitated, then set my graphite pencil down. I walked to the top of the stairwell and flicked the wall switch. The bare incandescent bulb illuminated the concrete landing below. Both solid oak doors were standing ajar. They were not merely cracked. They were pushed wide, resting parallel to the cinderblock walls of the storage wings. I stood at the top of the steps, cataloging the anomaly. Old houses settle. Hinges drift out of alignment. Ambient air pressure from an open upstairs window can occasionally create a vacuum effect. I supplied myself with basic architectural logic. I descended the stairs, retrieved the toy from the concrete floor, and approached the thresholds. I gripped the tarnished brass knobs. I pulled both doors shut. The metal strike plates clicked firmly into the respective door frames. They required physical effort to latch. Drafts do not turn brass hardware. The anomalies escalated over the following week. I am a freelance illustrator. I operate out of my home office. I live alone. The only other biological footprint in the structure belongs to the cat. I began returning from standard errands, picking up groceries, retrieving the mail, to find the cellar doors open again. The unlatching occurred exclusively when I was out of the house or asleep on the second floor. The confrontation culminated on a Thursday afternoon. I had spent 20 minutes searching the main floor for Barnaby. He was missing from his usual perches. I assumed he had slipped past my ankles during my morning laundry rotation and was locked downstairs. I approached the basement entryway. I stepped onto the first wooden tread. I descended the second. I stopped. I had a direct, unobstructed line of sight to the concrete landing. I watched the physical mechanics of the right side door operate independently. The aged brass knob rotated clockwise, a slow, deliberate torsion. The rusted hinges issued a dry, metallic groan. The heavy oak panel drifted inward, swinging backward into the pitch-black storage wing. There was no wind, there was no seismic shift, just the deliberate application of leverage against a heavy barrier. A sharp, wet hiss erupted from directly behind my calves. Barnaby was not trapped in the cellar. He had been sleeping upstairs in my bedroom. He crept to the edge of the top step. He was staring past my legs, his unblinking pupils dilated into massive black discs, locking his focus entirely on the widening gap of the doorway. He began to pace backward, keeping his eyes fixed on the lower landing, emitting a low growl from the back of his throat. I did not descend the remaining steps. I grabbed the handrail, pivoted on my heel, scooped the cat into my arms, and retreated to the kitchen. I locked the cellar door at the top of the stairs. Barnaby has not approached that side of the house since. If I walk toward the basement, he immediately flees to the upper level. Animals possess a sensory bandwidth that humans lack. They detect barometric shifts. They hear frequencies outside our spectrum. They do not manufacture fear. My parents, who now live 2 states away, suggested a foundation issue causing the frames to warp. To satisfy their skepticism and to anchor my own sanity, I purchased a small, battery-operated surveillance lens. I bypassed the cellar stairs, reaching down from the upper step with an extension pole, and mounted the camera to the exposed floor joist directly above the concrete landing. I angled the field of view to capture both oak doors. Yesterday, I left the house for a scheduled dental appointment. I returned 3 hours later. I unlocked the top door. Both bottom doors were wide open. I retrieved the camera, plugged the storage drive into my desktop monitor, and reviewed the footage. The digital timestamp progressed normally. At exactly 1:14 p.m., the brass knob on the right door rotated. The panel swung open. I watched the footage multiple times. The terror did not stem from seeing a spectral figure. The frame remained entirely devoid of human shapes. The terror lived in the microscopic details. The camera utilizes an infrared laser array to film in the dark. That specific light spectrum illuminates floating particulate matter, the endless stream of dust dancing in the basement air. When a door opens due to internal house pressure or a draft, the displaced air pushes outward. The dust should blow from the storage room onto the landing. I watched the illuminated dust particles on my monitor when the oak door drifted open. The dust on the concrete landing did not blow outward. It was violently sucked inward, pulling across the threshold into the dark void of the storage wing. Whatever is residing behind that door did not push it open to leave the room. It pulled the door open because something massive sitting in the dark was drawing a long, deep breath. I have contacted a structural contractor to permanently seal the lower frames with industrial lag bolts. Until they arrive, I keep the upstairs access deadlocked.